Noelle Merring is next, but first, healthcare workers in the state of Ohio now have conscience protection rights. Republican Governor Mike DeWine signed a budget bill into law on June 30th that includes conscience protections for medical professionals. Doctors, healthcare workers, hospitals, and insurers can now decline to participate or perform or pay for any healthcare service that violates their deeply held religious beliefs. Critics say the legislation could lead to medical discrimination against LGBTQ Ohioans.
Mark my words, our union will defend any member who gets in trouble for teaching honest history. We have a legal defense fund ready to go, and we are preparing for litigation as we speak.
That was Randi Weingarten. She's the president of the American Federation of Teachers, speaking to members announcing legal protection for teachers accused of pushing critical race theory. As woke ideology is infiltrating secular schools across the country, our next guest says it's becoming a poison in Catholic schools as well. Here now is the author of the new book, Awake, Not Woke, A Christian Response to the Cult of Progressive Ideology, Noelle Merring. Thanks for being here, Noelle. I want to start with critical race theory and the controversy surrounding it. For those who don't know, what exactly is critical race theory, and why is it making its way into Catholic schools?
Well, critical race theory is basically founded in critical theory applied to racial grievances. It began in the late 80s, early 90s in law schools from the father of the movement is named Derek Bell, and then was disseminated further through Kimberly Crenshaw and her pivotal essay, Mapping the Margins. But it was never meant to remain in the ivory towers of academia. And I think this is partially where the confusion lies, is that it was always meant to be a means of activism and furthering a specific ideology aimed at revolution. So though it began as an academic roots, it has since disseminated and is manifested and called euphemistically things like equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism. These are all not specifically perfectly aligned with CRT. However, they are natural outgrowth of this ideology that has the same aims and has the same filter, seeing all of society through a lens of power.
Mm-hmm. And it's certainly all over the public curricula. I mean, you discuss the difference between critical thinking and critical theory in your new book. Explain the difference, and how does critical theory end up supporting Marxist ideology?
Well, so the difference is what their ends are. The end of critical thinking is to arrive at the truth. So the critical thinker invites objections, invites debate for the sake of arriving at the truest possible conclusion. Critical theory has a very different end. The end of critical theory is power and activism. So the means of achieving power and activism are not going to be inviting criticism, but rather silencing criticism, silencing dissent, coercion, and also eventually tyranny and control. So if they have very different ends inform the different means that they deploy, and one is oriented towards the truth, the other one is really oriented towards domination.
The American Federation of Teachers at their conference this week featured Dr. Ibram Kendi. He offered this analysis. Listen.
We live in a dangerously racist society. There are racist ideas that are swirling around that are teaching darker skinned kids that there's something wrong with them because of the color of their skin. There are ideas that are swirling around teaching white kids that there's something right about them because of the color of their skin.
Noelle, where are kids being taught this exactly?
Well, it's incredibly deceptive and pretty ironic because DEI and anti-racism training has famously taught through such establishments as the Smithsonian Museum and also DEI trainings in New York education public school system that such virtues as being on time, hard work, objective reasoning, rational thought, politeness are all white virtues. These are incredibly racist things to be teaching students, teachers, and communities. So that they are on record teaching these racist things that are prompting white progressive parents in recent studies to believe that Black people are less capable than what Black people see in themselves, disempowering the Black community in an incredibly racist in principle. So I don't see the evidence of where the conservative schools or even non-anti-racist ideological communities are teaching such racist things, although racism certainly will continue to be a problem. But they are the ones who are actually teaching institutionalized racism through their ideology.
Yeah, no, I look, the idea we should be putting forth is every child is a child of God, and we should not focus on externals, but on the heart of individuals, what they do, what they say. You know, evil resides in the heart of man, not in his skin color. And I think if we taught that more and stop making everybody so overly sensitive and sensitized to externals, maybe we'd get a lot further in race relations. Maybe. In a recent column, you discuss how parents at a Catholic school in Chicago voiced concerns that woke ideology was being inserted in all aspects of their children's education. Now, does anyone even care about what these parents are saying? Are they listening?
Well, it's still to be determined. The parents have certainly erected a strong fight. They've started a website, and they really are loyal to the school deeply. They want to see the school walk the right road. So that they've had a certain amount of pushback, and there are certain aspects of the administration that have expressively said that this is the road that they're committed to, and the parents who are not on board have to get off the ship. So excuse the mixed analogies, but so there is certainly some intransigence that they're seeing, but they still are very hopeful that they can help the school and reform and also return to the unified community that they have always been as a mixed race school with diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. They've always been very unified, very committed to upholding and helping every student at the school. And this divisive ideology has begun segregating them and introducing certain notions of grievances that they didn't feel, and including lower socioeconomic families of darker skin color who are now considered oppressors because because they're Hispanic, for example, or Asian, and they're looking at their multi-million-dollar friends and saying, I don't feel that I'm oppressing you. This doesn't make sense. Why is our friendship being eroded in this way? So it's incredibly toxic.
Wow. In your new book, you write that woke ideology assaults church teaching. How so, Noelle?
Well, I think it fundamentally preaches an anti-gospel. So the church defines the nature of a human person based on the love of God, that we are his sons and daughters, and that we are therefore brothers and sisters. And our mission in life is to spread the good news that we are loved deeply and known. And the woke ideology defines the human person based on the oppression of society, either in proximity to it by being a perpetrator or by being a victim. So if oppression is the root, the very definition of who you are, your message then is to go spread the news to other people that not that they are loved, but that they are hated. And I think we see this clearly in the way in which a woman who is pro-life, for example, will not she'll be considered not fully living out her womanhood. She won't be allowed to walk with an official affiliation with a women's march, and because she doesn't accept abortion. And this is a sign that it's not merely about empowering women or minorities or homosexuals, but rather about furthering an agenda based on oppression and power narratives.
So far, about 25 states, Noelle, have considered legislation or taken other steps to limit how race and racism can be taught, according to analysis by Education Week. Now, teachers and educators argue that they know the best way to teach their students, not politicians or even parents. Your thoughts?
Well, I think this is a sign that something is greatly amiss because the parents have become the enemies of the school and the teachers in many schools now. They have divergent missions for the children. So the parents largely are saying we want our children to learn about the evils of racism. We want them to know what Jim Crow laws were and about the evils of slavery. That's not all that they're doing. But when you challenge the school on it, they'll retreat to these things. You just don't want to know the history. However, what they're dissembling on is the fact that they're actually inserting a whole ideology that totalizes half-truths and creates a filter for the students in which they are segregated, trying to resolve segregation through further segregation. And the thing that underlying that is that there's no universal human principle of how we behave with one another, that we ought to behave differently based on immutable characteristics of ourselves. And it really refutes any potential for our perception of sort of a brotherhood and sisterhood that I think we are called to have as human beings, called to one common family ultimately.
I agree. You know, I hazarded the idea the other day. What children really need is to look at great American lives, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, and the contributions of each of those people, so that we're not leading with the differences, but leading with the glories of American history. I mean, nobody talks about John Adams being not only a founding father and a dead white guy, but also an abolitionist who defended the rights of freed slaves and tried to free others. I mean, the complexity of history is lost in this kind of generalization, as you said, canonizing half-truths. I read a piece this week suggesting that critical race theory is compatible with Catholicism and Catholic teaching. And the thesis was, look, race is what divides us, so race has to be the lens through which we seek justice. How would you respond to that?
Well, it's an incredibly unnuanced view, for one thing. It collectivizes individuals and makes sin and love something abstract. Whereas we know in the Catholic faith that my sins are mine, and my ability to love and call to love is also mine to respond to. I can't abstract virtue into being part of a certain movement, or abstract sin into being part of a certain group. So I think that these are incredibly destructive things to introduce, and to think that they can coexist with Christ. I truly believe and talk about in my book that this movement is fundamentally an attack on God. It's an attack on reason, on human nature, and authority. And it supplants all those things with chaos and human power. It's fundamentally anti-logos. And I think it will ride on the residue of a waning Christianity until it has replaced it, unless we stop it. But we need clarity in order to see that, because it operates a great deal on confusion.
Noelle, I thank you for your insight and your clarity. Awake, Not Woke, A Christian Response to the Cult of Progressive Ideology by Noelle Mering is available at bookstores everywhere and online, and at EWTNRC.com. Noelle, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.